Hey up. It's recently been Thanksgiving in the US, so I thought that it could be a good time to cover something that our cousins in the States might appreciate: the interesting etymology of the place name York, and by association, New York. So, New York is obviously one of the most well-known cities in the world, being the largest city in the US and having featured in countless films and TV series over the years. As a Yorkshireman, and a big fan of our ancient city of York in Yorkshire, I do occasionally have moments of realisation when I hear the name New York and think, yeah, it is interesting that there's this metropolis on the other side of the Atlantic with a name that's obviously somehow related. So I thought I'd look into the etymology of York and how New York ended up with the name that it's had for the past 360 years. The 2,000-year history of York is fascinating, and it could easily be the subject of an hours-long multi-part series, but I'll try and keep it focused on bits directly relating to the etymology this time, just for the sake of brevity. So to go back to the very beginning, the first attestation of York comes from Roman sources going back to around 100 AD. The 9th Legion had founded York in 71 AD at the site of what is now York Minster and called it Eboracum, which is thought to be derived from the Brittonic language of the native Celts who'd lived in the area since around 500 BC. The Brittonic word is thought to be something phonetically similar that was then Latinised, something like Eburacon, meaning place of the yew trees. Interestingly, this ancient Brittonic name is still similar to the name York's given in modern Celtic languages, such as Effroc in Welsh and Ivrach in the Scottish Gaelic, and translated literally those names still mean place of the yew trees, or something similar. The Roman fort grew over several hundred years of Roman rule into being the largest settlement in northern England. Roman rule in Britain collapsed in the 400s as part of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and following that the Angles came over from what is now southern Denmark or northern Germany, and settled in the area in the 500s AD. It seems that by the 600s they'd given the city the name Jofferwyk, which means something like village or settlement of the wild boars. This is really interesting because it's thought that what happened was effectively a kind of phonetic conflation between the Roman Eboracum and the similar sounding representation in the language of the Angles, which just happened to be Jofferwyk. So the name changed from meaning place of the yew trees to settlement of the wild boars through what's effectively a linguistic mix-up. The city kept growing in the Anglian period, both economically and as an administrative hub, and in this period it became the centre of the Kingdom of Northumbria. It was likely due to this prosperity and importance that it was targeted by the Viking Great Heathen Army in 866 and conquered by the Vikings while the Anglian rulers of Northumbria were in the middle of a civil war. The Viking period of York, which is academically known as the Scandinavian York or Viking York period, led to Old Norse having an impact on a lot of place names and language in the Yorkshire area, and the etymology of York was no exception to this. In a process similar to when the Angles arrived, the Vikings, the Danes, renamed Jofferwyk to Jorvik through another process of phonetic conflation. So Jofferwyk meant village of the boars, and now under the similar sounding translated Viking name Jorvik, it changed its meaning again, possibly to something boar related, but also possibly to something like Bay of the Horse, with Jor meaning horse and Vik meaning bay. Other place names in Yorkshire that were impacted by this period include the Ridings, or the three administrative areas that Yorkshire was divided into, which comes from the Old Norse Thrithingur, meaning a third part. Other examples such as places with the suffix by, coming from the Old Norse for village, as seen in Selby and Whitby. Places with the suffix thorpe, meaning something relating to a farm, as seen in Grimethorpe, for example. And also places ending with thwaite, meaning clearing, as seen in places like Slaithwaite, among many, many other examples across Yorkshire. The Kingdom of Jorvik fell in 954 with the death of its last king, Eric Bloodaxe, and York was absorbed into England at that point. It kept a lot of its Scandinavian links and influences for hundreds of years afterwards, but that's, I think, probably a story for another video. The next big change was brought about by the Norman conquest of 1066, when the Normans, themselves being descendants of Vikings, took over England and began handing out land and titles to Norman rulers. I've read accounts of how Normans came and effectively simplified a lot of pre-existing place names in England, due to the fact that they were speakers of a completely alien language, Norman French. But I've also read that over time, and broader language shifts across the country, place names like Jorvik became shortened and abbreviated, and that's how, by the time Middle English was spoken across England, you start to see things like Yark and Jörg being written down as the place name. And by the 1200s onwards, something broadly resembling modern York would have been used. There's loads of important York history in the years following the Norman conquest, but for the sake of keeping things on track, I'll fast forward to the link between this city in the north of England, now called York after many evolutions of the name, and the city of New York in North America. So the royal title, the Duke of York, had been created in the 1300s and was given to the sons of the kings of England. It was a prestigious title that reflected the fact that Jorvik had been a kingdom in the past, and then the Jarls or Earls of York had been important following that, both up to and occasionally after the Norman conquest. By the 1600s, a tradition had been established whereby the monarch's second son was given the title the Duke of York, and that's a tradition that, interestingly, is still in effect to the present day. By the 1600s, European colonisation of North America was in full swing, and on the island of Manhattan, Dutch settlers had established New Amsterdam as part of the larger New Netherlands colony on the east coast of North America. After the Second Anglo-Dutch War of the 1660s, the English had captured New Amsterdam, and the city was renamed New York, and New Netherlands became the province of New York, named after the Duke of York, who had both helped organise and fund the English forces during the Second Anglo-Dutch War, and he'd also been named the first owner of the proprietary colony of the province of New York. Interestingly, the area around modern New York was initially named Yorkshire, which is another Yorkshire connection. It was divided up into 3 ridings, which again is going back to that Old Norse word meaning to divide into 3s, an east, west and north riding, but these were soon renamed and replaced by other administrative areas. Despite efforts by the Dutch to retake the area, it remained an English and later British possession and grew to become an important city in British North America. After the American Revolution, it was evacuated by the British in 1783 and has of course been part of the US ever since, growing to become the megacity and financial and cultural hub that it is today. Interestingly, the Duke of York that the province and city was initially named after was the son of Charles I, and he himself went on to become King James II, who was later in his reign deposed during the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and his descendants went on to be the famous Jacobite pretenders who led the Jacobite risings in the 1700s. So that's a brief history of the evolution of the name of the city of York and a snippet on how it became the name that lent itself to the megacity in the US. There are also other places around the world named after York, including several places in Canada, Australia, and other towns in the US. Interestingly as well, Toronto, the biggest city in Canada, was originally founded as York until it was renamed in the 1830s. So from ancient Celtic to Latin to Anglian to Old Norse to Middle English, the name of the city and the surrounding county of Yorkshire has had a really fascinating etymological history, and I appreciate that I've only lightly touched upon a lot of areas that in themselves have hundreds of books and academic papers written about them. But if you're interested in any particular part of what I've said, then I do encourage you to dig a bit deeper, as I'm sure you'll find it fascinating in its own right. So I think that's been plenty for today. Thank you very much for listening. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone who's celebrating that one. And I'll see you later.